And now on to the program. Let's talk green for a while, huh? Green energy and green jobs are in the headlines every day, and we're joined today by two experts on the topic who will tell us what's happening and how it will affect the business community. First, we have Bill Glahn. Bill is the director of the Minnesota Office of Energy Security and Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Commerce. Before taking on his current position, Bill was the founder of an energy management consulting firm, and then he served as Vice President and Controller for the Minnesota Municipal Power Agency. Please welcome Bill Glahn. As you probably saw in our marketing materials for this event, Bill was supposed to be joined by another Bill, Bill Blazer, but couldn't make it. So we had to go out and find a third Bill, and we accomplished that. Fortunately, Bill is being replaced by Bill Grant. Bill Grant is a longtime environmental advocate with expertise in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and regulatory reform, and has been the director of the Isaac Walton League's Midwest office since 1995. So please join me in welcoming Bill Grant. And now as a moderator, I'm supposed to keep these guys on track by asking Bill or Bill or Bill to talk. In any event, what we're going to be doing this morning is having just kind of a brief introduction of the topic by each of our guests, and then do some questions and answers. And I'll start with Bill Glahn because he's the one that had the longest time to prepare.
Thank you. And on behalf of the governor, I appreciate you inviting me here this morning, as well as the other bill. And hopefully we'll have a lively discussion. We already have had a lively discussion on the nuclear issue this morning. I did, before we launch into the green jobs subject, and I did want to give a little bit of an overview of some of the principles that we're trying to apply when we're developing our legislative initiative for this upcoming session in the executive branch. And Bill will follow me by giving a preview of some of the other issues besides the nuclear ban that will surely come up in the next session. But in putting together an energy and environmental initiative for the 2010 session, at least the approach that we're trying to take, and I'm sure areas where we could have a lot of agreement with our folks, our friends in the environmental community, is the goal is not to stop doing things. In the example of the nuclear ban, to stop doing nuclear power. The goal is that whatever we do wish to do, we should do more energy efficient, more environmentally sound than we have been. For example, we shouldn't just stop driving our cars or drive our cars less. We should make sure that the cars we have get better gas mileage and that we have alternatives to transportation in the automobile. So we have a less impact on the environment from transportation, but not by taking the approach, we're not going to do it, the dark ages comment that we heard earlier this morning. One of my personal things is infrastructure. I would characterize it, we're having this discussion about nuclear power in part because we haven't had a lot of investment in the energy sector, at least in terms of the backbone of the system, the transmission grid that we have in the state, or the baseload power plants that we have that are expected to run 24/7, 365 days a year. We have had, as we discussed this morning, a huge investment in alternative energy, wind power. Actually, the 450 megawatts is up to 1,800 megawatts that we have in the state. But again, those are resources that are great when they're available, but we have to have something that when they're not available. So the idea is that we've had in the past big efforts to invest in our infrastructure, the transmission grid, our baseload power plants, but that was 25, 30, 35 years ago. We're in some sense living off the fat of the land, living off the investments that our previous generations have made in this sector. We need to get to the point where we renew that capital investment and that we have a backbone that will take us into the, well into the 21st century rather. The idea being that we can't leave it to the next generation to make that investment because we're going to get to the point where we count on those lights coming on and we want to make sure that continues in the future. So I applaud Great River Energy. They're going to announce at the end of the month, they're going to inaugurate a new power plant that they've built in Minnesota. I applaud that because we talk about how 20% of nuclear power for our state, we actually import more than 20% of our power from out of state. It'd be nice to have some resources here at home to help us through. So what I'd like to see in Minnesota is build on our local strengths, whether it's wind power or our agricultural community and biomass power, and to have an energy policy that works for us here in Minnesota and not one that's imposed from Washington or New York or Brussels, Belgium, or wherever it may be. So those are some of the policy principles that we're going to follow in putting together our initiative for the next session. And Bill will tell you about some of the issues besides nuclear that will surely come up.
Thanks very much, Bill, and appreciate being here this morning. And as I told the person who called me to invite me, you're not likely to get the same exact perspective from Bill Grant that you got from Bill Blazer, but that's probably okay too. 2 years ago, the Minnesota legislature took some rather historic and courageous steps in the area of energy and really set a course that I think was the kernel, anyway, of a comprehensive state energy policy. What's happened since then, of course, is that we have not really implemented that outline that we set for ourselves. And those include commitments to renewable energy, although we are making good strides there, commitments to energy efficiency, and most significantly, from my perspective, commitments to reductions in greenhouse gases. And we set a rather ambitious set of targets for ourselves, a 15% reduction in CO2 emissions by the year 2015. Suffice to say, 2 years later, we're not only not reducing our emissions of CO2, but they do gradually continue to go up, although the recent downturn in the economy has certainly dampened what would have otherwise been the expected emissions of CO2. So one of the things that I believe will be an issue at the Capitol this year will be a decision about whether to adopt a model rule that's being developed by a group of states, including Minnesota, to cap emissions and trade credits. It's very similar to the proposal that has passed the U.S. House and is awaiting action in the Senate. And the hope is that after a group of stakeholders from around the various states that are signatories to the agreement have put this on the table, that states like Minnesota will sign on. And now, particularly since it is beginning to appear that Senate action this fall is unlikely, I think it's important that Minnesota and the rest of the Midwestern states, as the Northeastern states have already, as the West Coast states have already, continue to apply pressure on the federal government to act in this critical area. So you will see a bill, I believe, to adopt the recommendations of this regional group and to therefore include Minnesota in a regional cap and trade system that would begin implementation in 2012. A second issue that was teed up by the group that Governor Pawlenty put together in response to the legislation that passed 2 years ago, the Minnesota Climate Change Advisory Group, was a transportation initiative. We've talked a little bit about higher mileage standards for vehicles.